I'd like to speak about creativity in protesting Islamic fundamentalism, particularly since I've had some difficulties trying to speak about my experiences. For example, at Goldsmiths University, the Islamic Society students there tried to aggressively cancel my talk, and I have actually once been barred from speaking at Warwick University, though of course that decision was eventually overturned as a result of protests. But the decision to initially bar me was defended by the likes of The Guardian. I've faced character assassinations, censorship on social media, and I've had more death threats than I care to remember, including one that was a pre-recorded threat from the intelligence services of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, can you imagine? They had so many people to threaten that day that they needed a recording. The Iranian regime has called me immoral, corrupt, a harlot. And of course, many people here have labeled me Islamophobic, even though criticism of religion, which is just really another idea, or criticism of religious fundamentalism, which is just really another far-right political movement, is not bigotry against believers, in the same way that criticizing Trump and the Christian right is not the same as attacking Christians. They're two very different things. They've also called me, some have called me inflammatory and offensive. And I do understand, of course, that creativity in protest against Islamic fundamentalism, against religious morality, can offend, even if it's not done intentionally. And I think it can offend because it pushes the boundaries and it challenges dominant narratives and perspectives. And I think it offends because it challenges the limits of what is permissible for people like me. Others can live their lives in any way that they choose. But for those of us who are from minority backgrounds, from migrant backgrounds, who come from Muslim families, who come from countries who have fled Islamic laws, there is this expectation that we must live within confines that have been imposed by fundamentalists, fascists, and mullahs. But let me ask you a very simple question. Do I or do I not have the right to tell my story? Do Islam's non-believers, the kafars, the harlots, the unveiled women, those who want to question and challenge religion, the ex-Muslims, do we not have the right to speak and to live and to love the way that we choose? I agree that what I say is sometimes uncomfortable to hear for some, not for everyone. It's uncomfortable for some, and if I'm fully honest, it's very uncomfortable, oftentimes for me even to say the things that I do. But what else can I do to say that I exist, that we exist, and that there are many of us, that we are not property, we are not extensions of male guardians and of the family patriarch and of some homogeneous imagined community or society. And I say imagined because no society and no so-called community is homogeneous. There are so many differences of opinion. There are class struggles, social and political movements, and always there is dissent. So for me, it's really important that we can say we are individuals, we have rights, we have hopes, we have dreams. And I suppose the question is, if we don't speak, who will speak for us? If we don't speak, how can we move from exclusion to inclusion, from isolation to participation, from absence to presence, from shunning and trauma to survival, from discrimination to equality? Yet it's our words, even sometimes written on our own bodies, that are more offensive than death threats, violence, and murder. Let's not forget that as we speak, apostasy, which is the renunciation of religion, leaving religion, And blasphemy, which is poking fun of religion or criticizing it or questioning it, they are offenses punishable by death in a dozen countries under Islamic law. And it's not just people who are atheists and ex-Muslims like myself, but also many questioning and dissenting believers who are faced with these laws. These laws persecute some of the most wonderful people in all of our societies. Someone like Raif Badawi, who has been sentenced to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes in Saudi Arabia merely for writing and speaking and thinking freely. There are others like Sina Dehqan in Iran, Ayaz Nizami in Pakistan, and also Junaid Hafiz in Pakistan, who are currently languishing on death row on accusations and charges of blasphemy. And of course, women who transgress very restrictive religious norms and laws and mores face severe consequences, particularly because women are seen to be the personification of family and male and religious honor and pride. In Iran, 3 women have been sentenced to up to 42 years in prison between them, just for defying compulsory veiling rules. They have been charged with inciting prostitution because according to the Islamic regime in Iran, if you show your hair, you are inciting prostitution. And of course, it's not just over there. There are lots of people, young people in particular, living in Britain, living in the West, who face honor-related violence and threats, who face shunning and ostracization from their families because they want to be atheists, because they are gay, because they don't want to wear the veil. And shunning, while it's taken very lightly, is truly one form of psychological, long-term psychological torture and a form of social death penalty. When you are systematically silenced and erased in this way, often with violence, or at least always, somewhere behind the scenes, the threat of it, the mere act of speaking with creativity is an act of survival. And it's also an important act of resistance and civil disobedience. When the public space is so oppressive and so full of fear, subverting, flouting, disobeying ridiculous rules and mores, absurd ones, misogynist ones, not only challenges dogmas and taboos, but it helps to reclaim and transform the public space and society. That is, of course, not to say that racism doesn't exist, that anti-Muslim bigotry don't exist, that xenophobia doesn't exist. Of course they do. But because there is racism, you cannot ignore fundamentalism. And I'm talking about all fundamentalisms, including Hindu and Buddhist fundamentalisms, killing Muslims in India and Myanmar, to Jewish fundamentalisms in the Palestinian territories, to Christian fundamentalism, the rise of which we are witnessing in the United States and in many European countries. And likewise, just because there is fundamentalism, you can't ignore racism. You can't ignore one because of the other. You have to combat and fight against both. I think that creativity challenges bigotry by appealing to our common humanity. It responds to violence with humor and nonviolence. You can't be as afraid if you're laughing. It increases democratic and participatory politics. It moves you out of isolation and despair. It makes you feel less afraid. And I think with it, it brings courage and hope. Like the ex-Muslim because hashtag. It's a hashtag we started in 2015, thinking that only a few hundred people at most would join in to the hashtag, but it became viral in 24 hours, and it was the stories of countless people saying why they had left Islam and become non-believers. So some of them were quite funny, ex-Muslim because no 72 virgins for me. Others had very heartbreaking stories attached to their coming out in public. And of course, it became more than 120,000 tweets from over 65 countries worldwide, which was also met with solidarity actions from some Muslims as well. Other actions we've done is actions like the fast-defying actions during Ramadan. So instead of having sit-ins, we have eat-ins, where we eat in front of embassies of governments that imprison and flog people for eating and drinking water during Ramadan. Of course, people have the right to fast. There are members of my family that fast during Ramadan. But the point is that they are free to do it just as others should be free, including believers, not to fast if they don't want to. Like actions in solidarity with the movement in Iran against compulsory veiling, the White Wednesdays movement, or nude protests. You know, the thing is, when you are met with a fundamentalist movement that despises women's bodies, that want us to be erased from the public space, nude protest is an important challenge to that perspective that says there is nothing wrong with our bodies. They are not dirty, they are not obscene, they are not the source of fitna and chaos in society. And in fact, our bodies in our own hands can become tools for liberation. Or campaigns that assert that periods are natural and that we will never be ashamed for this natural occurrence in our bodies. Or acts like the atheist azan, which is subverting the Muslim call to prayer in order to normalize heresy and dissent. Or dancing in King's Cross, asking for believers to show support and love to the ex-Muslims in their families, in their societies and so-called communities, and asking for an end to the practice of shunning. Or creativity in defense of the LGBT rights of Muslims and ex-Muslims. Now, I know, some people think that Allah is gay is such an offensive word to use, but it's only offensive if you think being gay is something that needs to become offended by. In the same way that singers can sing about God being a woman, or you have placards in Pride saying, God is gay, Jesus is queer, Jesus has two dads. In that same vein and in that context of Pride in London, it's a struggle to challenge religious homophobia and open the space for LGBT Muslims and ex-Muslims. I think creativity in protest says to the fundamentalists, you do not have power over us. You cannot silence us. We will not submit to your rules. We will determine our own stories and history. As the brilliant organization Southall Black Sisters says, our tradition is struggle, not submission. Creativity in protest insists on the human rights of freedom of conscience. And let's not forget that freedom of conscience is not just the right to religion, but also the right to be free from religion. Creativity in protest also insists on freedom of expression, which, by the way, also includes the right to criticize religion, the sacred, and the taboo. And it does it in practice, in the public space, not in art galleries, and not as abstract and theoretical notions and concepts. It creates solidarity and insists on equality, not superiority and not difference. Creativity in protest goes, I think, to the core of what it is to be fully human. It enables us to reimagine society and the world and to change it for the better. Thank you very much.